Welcome to Am I on Mute? I'm Katrina Craigwell.
And I'm Annelise Campbell. And on this week's episode, we're talking about change.
I'm so excited for this conversation. We have the one and only Linda Boff, CMO of GE, among many other hats that she wears at the company, joining us to talk about the experience of working at GE and transforming the company over the last 3 years, transforming the way the company works through the pandemic, and also setting the company up for the future as it spins off into 3 publicly traded companies, GE Aerospace, GE Healthcare, and GE Vernova.
For our listeners who don't know, Katrina is a former GE alum and employee. So can you give us a little bit more background on why such a big monumental moment of change is just so drastic for a company like GE? Because I think GE is a company that we all know. It has that brand recognition, name value, but I don't think a lot of us realize how long it's been around, how massive of a company it is. So can you just paint some background for us on why this conversation is so important and this change for the company is such a big deal?
Yeah, absolutely. GE is over 130 years old. It operates globally. If you've charged your phone, if you have flown on a plane, needed healthcare and been in a hospital setting or care from your doctor, you've likely been on the other end of a GE machine, just to name a few. And the company and the team there has always been, and this was my experience, so open to invention and reinvention. It was part of the DNA of the company.
Yeah.
We always used to kind of share the quote of Thomas Edison, I find what the world needs and I proceed to invent it. And it's a hard exercise. You have to be really, really open. There has to be trust. There also has to be an excitement and a vision about the future and a tolerance for failure. And maybe when that doesn't go how you'd hoped.
Yeah.
So it's pretty incredible to have this conversation. And I think the time that I spent on the team as part of Linda's team really was defining for me in terms of becoming a creative leader and thinking about brand marketing in a really modern way, getting deep in the DNA of the company. I always used to feel like I was an outsider. We used to talk about being an outsider inside.
Mm-hmm.
I did not grow up thinking about jet engines, but I certainly grew up as a bit of a nerd and loving technology and loving big structures. And so getting to walk inside of a factory and then share it with anybody else who might love that on places like Instagram and YouTube and in virtual reality and working with creators. There was such openness and innovation and transformation there in terms of how a brand behaves. And it takes a really special set of leaders to create the space for that. And that's just one chapter of a very, very long story at the company.
Yeah. I'm super excited for this conversation with Linda because I do think it takes a massive amount of intention and thoughtfulness when you're taking a major corporation through that type of change. And even I think by myself as a business leader, I'm even from our team culture and unity in year 1 to right now is completely different. And so I'm really excited to learn from Linda on some of those things that she did to help guide her teams through this major transformational moment. We're so excited for you guys to hear this conversation with Linda. You guys are in for a really, really good treat. Gems dropped.
So Linda Boff holds many roles. She's GE's Chief Marketing Officer, VP of Learning and Culture, and President of the GE Foundation. She's a passionate builder of global brands and businesses with expertise across the full range of integrated marketing communications, as well as culture and leadership development. As one of the highest-ranking female executives in her field, Linda has helped champion marketing, digital, and media transformation for the industry. She's a senior business leader partnering with GE's CEO to strategically reshape the company and drive cultural transformation. Linda, thank you for being with us.
Katrina, first of all, it's great to be here with you and great to be here with Annelise. Thank you so much for having me on.
So let's start back at the beginning. It's March 2020. GE is such a complex organization with offices and labs and factories, training centers, more. Paint us a picture of how the work at GE changed with the pandemic.
March 2020, I think it's that moment we all remember where we were. I happened to be sitting in our Norwalk office. We had just finished a global employee broadcast where we rolled out our new purpose. The world kind of, for all of us, stopped for a moment, certainly most importantly because of the severity and the nature of what we were all learning. On a business side, everything changed on a dime. We are in the commercial aerospace business. People stopped flying. We run factories, in some cases 24/7. There was a fear, can we still go into factories? The idea, literally the word shelter in place. I remember that thinking, what does shelter in place mean? So it was kind of this reckoning moment, I think, for everybody, no matter where you were. And for us being a large industrial manufacturer, having a workforce, and I'll relate it to myself, a team that most of the time showed up in person. Even a global team, we were all in offices. So all of a sudden, we had to think through what this meant for our customers, what this meant for our teams, and what it meant for the health of the people we work with. I think we formed a COVID task force in, I don't know, a matter of hours so that we could start to get our arms around what we were hearing and try to separate fact from, what was speculation.
I know I've heard you talk about in the past how GE, the company, actually kind of certain parts of the business were able to go into overdrive to help with the pandemic. Will you talk a little bit about how you identified that, how you made some of those choices?
Yeah, no, I love that, Katrina. Thanks for the question. So at the time, our healthcare business, now healthcare is a separate company called GE Healthcare, but at the time, obviously, healthcare was part of GE. And we learned, and I almost hate to admit this, that we had a very small part of the business that made ventilators. Well, if you go back to March 2020, all anybody wanted was access to a ventilator. And so the team at GE Healthcare, I mean, I'll steal your word, did go into overdrive. And we went from, I don't think we even had a full single shift. We quadrupled shifts, which is a big deal in manufacturing land. And to meet that kind of demand, not only did we have the people who were working in the plant, but Katrina, we had people within the business driving hundreds of miles across the country because that was the call, that was the mission. We had the opportunity to produce ventilators. We did a partnership with Ford to accelerate that. And I think one of the things I've always felt really privileged to be part of at GE is this ability to answer the clarion call of what the world needs. And at that moment, the world needed ventilators. And we were going to figure out how we could make more ventilators. So that will always remain with me as a moment of light.
Can I just ask you on that topic? That is a moment where everyone is balancing or calibrating fear, very valid personal fear and worry and risk, with the potential to drive an incredible impact for the world. How did you as a leader kind of talk to the teams about calibrating that risk?
I think it's one of the foundational questions of how we all worked through the pandemic. And Katrina, honestly, I think some of that are lessons that we're going to continue to learn. I had to do a readjustment. I'm an in-person person, as you and I remember from all our time together. I like being in an office. I like seeing people. I like the hum, if you will, of a team. I like the creative that comes out of that. And so as a leader, I had to do my own calibration first, which was, we're going to make this work, damn it. But it's not going to feel inherently comfortable at first. And the fortunate thing, if we can call any of this fortunate, is we were all in the same place at the same time trying to figure it out, right? Whether you were a leader who was used to working shoulder to shoulder or somebody who's more accustomed to remote work. I think one of the things I found was trying to exercise an empathy that I think comes somewhat naturally to me with what were excruciating circumstances of people finding themselves at home with their school-age children or needing to get to a place where they simply had more space to live. And there's so many people on my particular team in GE Marketing and Communications that have young families. And that was just, sort of watching that, because my kids are older. I did not have to balance that part. I think taught me as a leader to be more understanding and to offer hope and optimism and community at a time when we all needed that. And there was a lot of sharing, particularly in those early months where we were all trying to figure it out. I hope and believe that's something that's now a permanent tattoo. And because we have the ability to return to offices. Nobody's fully returning to offices. I'm not sure they ever will. And people are still balancing all the demands of being a whole person.
Linda, I know you mentioned empathy and just kind of identifying those moments as leaders where you felt that shift and had to kind of, dig a little bit deeper to figure out how to show up in a way that was most meaningful to you, but also to the teams that you had to lead. So one of the things I'd love to hear you talk about is, what aspects of working remotely really surprised you in a good way? Like, what were the things that you loved taking from the pandemic? And what are some of the things that you're like, yeah, I definitely will not do that again?
It's a great question. Once we all learned how to do this, not just the technology around Teams, but how to operate in that environment, what happened was everything became super transactional because you went from one meeting to another meeting with no shoulder time, with little, in my experience, of the mortar between the bricks, which is what helps relationships form. And I think for those of us who had worked together, okay, you have a shorthand, you know how to work together, you know each other a bit. I think for the people who entered our team or any new team, new jobs during the pandemic, I think that is super, super hard to imagine because you jump into the work. And yes, it's about the work, but I personally believe it's the solidity and the quality of relationships that help make the work better, certainly more fulfilling, but actually just better. I work in a creative field. Ideas are important, just as important as metrics. And I think without the ability, Annalise, to kind of have the relationship side of that build, I think that's really rough. So now when we do get together, which is not every day, it's with an intent to be able to give each other time to think, to be able to be strategic, to frankly be able to have some unstructured time as well as structured time. So I think that part's really important. I'm a productive person. It's hard not at the same time to like the efficiency of it all. You pick up a couple hours. Hopefully, I will continue to use 30 minutes of what I picked up to continue to walk the dog at the end of the day, which is something I don't do when I go into the office as much. So I think it taught me even more the value of time management, calendar management. I've always been a big believer that if you don't own your calendar, everybody else will. So I think the pandemic strangely, and I want to hold on to this, gave me this ability to say, wait a minute, I've gained some commuting time in theory. How do I use that in lots of ways, including personal? And then I think the other one I would punch out is it's made me more judicious on travel and commitments that I think I would have just done as a matter of course. Oh, I'm in New York City. Yeah, I'll stay for that dinner. I'll go to that thing. It's easy to travel. I'll just do it. And I have gotten back to doing some of that, and I love that. But I think it's also allowed me to kind of separate wheat from chaff a little bit in terms of what's really important. Are you really going to travel to that meeting? The commercial aviation side of me says, yes, always get on that plane. But the personal side says, you don't need to go to everything every time.
I love that. That's something that we all need to do. The pandemic forced us to kind of take stock and say, what is actually worth our time, our investment, making those sacrifices.
Yeah.
And I hope that's something that all leaders can take away in terms of how they prioritize their time coming into this new hybrid environment.
One other thought, just as you said that, I also have newfound joy when I do get together and see people. So we had an ANA board meeting last week in person in New York City, and it was absolutely wonderful to see a group of people that I really haven't seen in a couple years. So I think there's also that appreciation when you do see people. You really want to sort of physically hug them or metaphorically just say, wow, there is joy in being together.
You talked a little bit about the importance of kind of the interpersonal relationship and driving creativity You have been such a champion of experimentation in marketing for a long time. Can you talk a little bit about how to create a successful culture of experimentation? And did that change when teams are working in a distributed way?
Katrina, I think we all got a little safe, particularly that first year or so of the pandemic. I think it was on a creative front, I mean. I think there was a little bit of nobody wants to say the wrong thing. We're in a situation, truly a life and death situation, a lot of uncertainty. And the work, I think, and I'm talking about the whole industry, I personally think suffered as a result of that. I think people were in the middle lane. They didn't want to veer right, they didn't want to veer left. There were exceptions, but I think that was true. I now think, and thank you, to me, experimentation has always been particularly important at GE because it's an expression of the DNA of the company. It's an expression of the DNA of Edison, a culture of invention. Our business is invention in many ways. So our marketing should be invention as a way to kind of bring out the essence of that DNA. Once again, I think we got a little safe there. There was a bit of a hunkering down. We are in a different headset now. I think it allowed us to start experimenting again at the end of last year. If you'll allow me to brag for a second, we did this wonderful partnership with the New York Times where GE literally took over the entire paper with a couple dozen full page ads, a wrap, and the space to tell our story in a fairly glorious way. Could we have done that during the pandemic? I guess so. Did we have the right headspace? Did we give ourselves permission? I don't know. I don't know that we had those brain cells at that time. And from a portfolio business point of view, December was also a great moment for us to tell the story of the future of the company. That might have been a little harder. But I do think there's a direct relationship with what we all went through together. I think there was a dearth of experimentation industry wide. And it's so wonderful that companies are getting back to it. I've missed it.
Yes. I want to ask you about another element of that New York Times partnership because I remember seeing when it launched, and it was really kind of celebrating the future of the focus of GE, right? As GE spins into three companies, GE Aerospace, GE Healthcare, and GE Vernova. And so very much a transformation, but the unity and the celebration that I saw across all of the teams at GE sharing the work on LinkedIn and really acting as one struck me. And so how do you maintain that unity across disparate teams that are going through such a major transformation?
When we announced that we were going to separate into three companies, which was November of 21, we made the announcement about the businesses and about the opportunity for share owners and employees and customers. At the time, we were not ready to talk about the brand because the brand could, in all honesty, have been on one, two, three, or none of those future companies. And we really went through a process, as you do in these situations, of self examination. What is the importance of the brand? And I am so thrilled that we gave ourselves the time to do that because the answer came roaring back from customers, from employees, and even from investors. This is a global brand that matters. We build things, as Katrina, you and I built so many things over the years together. And we build things that have big impact in electrifying the world and helping people get better in powering homes and schools, et cetera, around the world. So it was really affirming to kind of go forward and say, GE remains. The companies will be separate. They'll have different investors. They'll be independent companies. But the essence of the brand, the legacy, the foundation will live on. To work at GE is to fall in love with GE. And I think that essence has remained and everyone wants to carry it forward. They will carry it forward in different ways. And that's good, right? You have a foundation and then you build up from the studs of that. So to get back to your very specific question about the New York Times, I think in many ways what the Times allowed us to do was to express in words and pictures the underlying idea I just talked about, which is three missions, three industries, three purposes, but all built on this idea of innovation, of invention, of back to the Edison quote, I figure out what the world needs and then I go and invent it. It has not been hard to motivate teams in that direction, because that's, if you work at GE, that is part of, I think, who you are. Each one of us holds a piece of that brand ourselves. And I think people are card carrying members of that going forward. Katrina, to this day, the hashtag GE Proud is still alive and well and organic.
It's been a number of years since I've been at GE, but I always say to people, GE will always be in my heart. Very proud to have worked there. Every time we fly a plane and I see a GE engine, I'm always, now I have a son, I'm saying, oh, look, it's the Dreamliner. And look at those GNX engines. And they're very special. And he's like, plain sky. So he'll get there.
You'll have him out on a shoot the way you did when you got us on Instagram for the first time. It does stay with you.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, you've done quite a bit of board work over the years as well, including serving on the board of Dunkin'. And I've always heard you talk about how much you loved that work. Can you talk a little bit about what you loved about it so much and how rising leaders can think about preparing themselves for those kinds of opportunities?
I was a director at Dunkin' for about 4 years, and then we sold Dunkin' to private equity, and it's a fabulous brand. So that part was enjoyable. But on a more macro sense, what's so interesting about being a director is you are advising. You are there to give strategic counsel to the leaders of the team, to management, versus to direct a team. It made me sort of step outside a little bit and think about what is the right thing for this business. It helped me, Katrina, become a better listener, because this wasn't my company. This was somebody else's company where I was trying, along with the fabulous group of directors, to give good counsel without kind of saying, here's the way I want it. And it's a wonderful discipline. You know, that old expression, you have two ears and one mouth. I think that is really true when you become a director. I came to being a public director, fairly late. I got the chance to do this on a not for profit and industry organizations. I wish I'd done it sooner. I really would urge people listening to find that opportunity. What are you passionate about? Passionate about animals? Are you passionate about children? Are you passionate about fashion? The needs are out there. And I think it can seem a little daunting, this idea of how do I get on a board? But I think there's something about following your heart, number one. And number two, being open to things where your skill set can benefit a group. I recently was fortunate enough to become a senior advisor to Citation, which is a private equity company. I do not think what attracted them to me and vice versa was my vast experience in private equity. It was that I understand marketing, communications, brand, and can bring that to the boardroom. So I think there's also a little bit of, when you are on a board, understanding the role you play versus the role of everybody else around the table.
Linda, you've given us so much great insight. What's one piece of advice that stuck with you throughout your career?
Something, Annalise, I find myself not just reminding myself of, but reminding people who I work with of, is this idea of how you show up. I often think about facts versus stories. And I'm a storyteller, so I love stories. But in our heads, we can tell ourselves some pretty gruesome stories on a bad day. We can get inside our own heads and wreak havoc when none of that is true. So I think finding a way to separate out facts versus those stories is really important. And I think back to something I heard so long ago, and the wisdom of it hits me at different points. This idea of you're never as bad as you are on your worst day and never as good as you are on your best. Because to me, that's about humility. You may be soaring one day, and you should feel good on those days. But, the next day things may go a little bit differently, and vice versa. We all make mistakes. I make mistakes every single day, and I can be super hard on myself. I think we need to give each other and give ourselves, most importantly, a break, show a little grace. And I think showing that grace can be helpful. So those are some of the things I think about a lot, both for myself, but also earlier in your career, as you're working your way through, sometimes those stories take on a mythical quality that they don't deserve.
I think everyone listening should heed that advice and will be better for it. They'll be able to sleep at night because of it. And I think that's really important.
It's the 3 a.m. things, right?
Yes.
Where you're like, wait, what? I said that? Somebody thought that?
Yeah, I can't believe I said that. Yeah.
Right. And no, you've made up 98% of that. It's wonderful to talk to both of you. You're both guiding lights.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Linda. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. I know our listeners will take so much with them after hearing some of your experiences at GE and throughout your career. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's such a pleasure to talk to you. And I salute both of you and what you're doing.
I don't know about you, Katrina, but Linda's last point on myths versus stories, I feel that so deeply because I think as a leader who always wants to do better, it's really, really easy to slip down that path of saying, oh, I'm the worst. I should have done this. I should have done that. And being able to separate some of that fact versus fiction in your head is so important. And it's something that I'm working on myself right now. My coach calls it being a fair witness. So instead of letting the stories run wild, just dealing with the facts and saying, okay, what evidence do I have to support this? Is this actually true? And I can say it has improved my mental health tremendously. But also, I think my performance as a leader, because I'm able to focus on what's real versus what Linda said, those like 3 a.m. keeping me up at night thoughts that aren't actually really helping me at all. So I love that she gave that advice because I think that is so critical as you're going through your career and trying to grow and improve without letting your self-talk beat you down to a pulp.
So funny. I thought when she said the 3 a.m., oh my God, I can't believe I said that. In my head, I was like, I can't believe I said that 10 years ago. So that's a problem. But it is a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, I have found in the past meditation to be helpful. I had a really hard time with meditation over the pandemic because I was like, you want me to stop and close my eyes and be still now? Are you crazy? Do you see what's going on? But it's almost like, how do you pump the brakes on your brain? How do you just kind of shift out of that thought pattern? And it is such a powerful thing to practice. I also love how she talked about the DNA of the company, kind of maintaining unity through all kinds of change is about being really clear about what the company stands for and having a team that can fall in love with that. They're not easy things, but you see it from the teams at GE and it's incredibly powerful, not just for how everyone feels about the work that they're doing, but for the work that they are also producing.
Yeah. And I think that one of the biggest things that helps breed that type of environment is what she talked about. Taking the time to look back at the brand identity, what matters, listening to people, your investors, your consumers, your team members. And I love that she said that that answer kind of roared back at them because if you're listening with open ears, the answers are out there. I think that's one of the best ways as business leaders we can build teams that have that affinity to the work that you're doing, that actually feel something when they're creating. That's really important. And I think all of us should try to take a little bit of GE with us. We're obviously not manufacturers or aerospace companies, but I do think there is something, a little magic that we can take from us and try to bring back to our teams from everything that Linda said.
Well, with that, thank you so much for listening. If you are enjoying this podcast, please feel free to follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And Annelise, where can people reach us?
Yeah, if you have any thoughts, any suggestions, anything you want to share with us, feel free to reach us at amionmute@gmail.com. Thank you to all of you who have already submitted such great stuff to us. We love it. So thanks so much for listening.